Hello everyone, and welcome Natalie. I'm very privileged to have Natalie here, and I think we are as well. So it's been a long time coming, and I was hoping to get you along here. She worked along Ellen Jones, the nice one, for Murudi, and Natalie's unique abilities to connect with people and her experience in Blue Zones, I think it's a unique opportunity to find how we can make Coffs Harbour a better place. I think it's a great place already, but how can we actually bring it further? How can we shape the future of Coffs Harbour? That's what I thought this talk is about. So Natalie, tell us about yourself, about Blue Zones. Why Blue Zones?
It very much came about from the research that I did when I looked at what it takes to build a healthy aging community that's intergenerational, where people are thriving from an individual level, as well as how do they connect with each other. And it was looking at some examples around the world, and what triggered me to look at examples around the world in the form of the Blue Zones was looking at my family's experience, looking at how do my parents who are baby boomers, how are they thinking about what work means to them, that sense of purpose and identity that work gives them, and thinking about how others in other types of jobs, how are they embracing the future work and the changes that happen now that we're living to 100. So there's a lot of changes that are happening on an individual level as well as a social level, and it hasn't necessarily been cracked by anyone very well, any particular city or country, because I guess culturally there's lots of differences. So I guess the starting point was looking at the Blue Zones. Dan Buettner, who became famous through his National Geographic article about 20 years ago about the Blue Zones, where they narrowed down what are the 9 different factors to a healthy, aging, long life in these 5 different places around the world, including Okinawa in Japan, Loma Linda in California, Icaria in Greece, Sardinia in Italy, and Nicoya in Costa Rica. They're all very different cultures, all different geographic locations. 4 of them are island states, and Loma Linda is actually away from the water. But what's common with all these places is a few things: the plant-based diet, the connection to, I guess, lots of physical...
A bit closer.
Oh, sorry. Can everyone hear me now? The vitality that comes from the daily activities. So being able to walk to work as well as the local shops is really important. So when it comes to urban design, those sorts of factors are important, and not being reliant on cars to get everywhere. So not necessarily having a separate routine for healthy living, but it's actually baked into how do people live on a daily basis. And a really big part of it that was really striking in looking at the Blue Zones and my visits to Loma Linda and Okinawa was seeing how important community is. So community in the form of deep relationships with close ones who aren't necessarily family members, but friendships that form over the course of a lifetime. Those are really key aspects to leading a long, healthy, happy life. And something that we don't always think about, because we think when we have time eventually, when we leave full-time work, we're going to have time then, that's when we'll focus on our networks. But over the course of interviewing a lot of Australians and people around the world who have seamlessly moved from full-time work to that next chapter, the ones who've done it extremely well, where it's been really easy for them, they've developed their networks and have been tightly integrated in their communities throughout their whole lives. It doesn't start when they're just a few years off from retirement. It's actually a life's work to build up really tight networks of connections with people who aren't just workmates, but also people that understand us, know what our strengths are, so that when things come up in life, those people are people we can turn to and talk to and will give us advice about ourselves in terms of what are the next stages, what can we do next, and how do we problem solve about ourselves, and also be able to give back to those who we know really well as well. So it's those deep relationships as well as connections to groups and causes that we really care about. And that takes a lifetime of work outside of our paid work that can lead to different interests and projects that we work on, along with the full-time work that we might be engaged with.
Wonderful. And can you give us a real example, let's say from Okinawa, about how people in Japan, especially Okinawa, maybe Okinawa is different to main Japan, how do they go about, making that happen? What groups do they form, or is it a lifelong group, or how does it work?
What I noticed about my visit to Okinawa was that people tend to be very engaged with their local neighbourhood, and that comes in the form of their gardens. They all have small garden patches where they'll grow their own herbs and vegetables. They'll share any excess vegetables and fruit with their neighbours. So that gives them the opportunity to go and chat with their neighbours, without being too obvious about checking in on someone they might be worried about. It's that beautiful sense of sharing, giving something, and having a daily exchange with neighbours and kind of knowing what everyone's at. And I guess you could argue it could be a little bit nosy looking. I was going to visit a temple quite early in the morning when I was there, happened to walk past a lady in her 80s, and she just really wanted to chat, and she wanted to know why I was there, what was I doing in Okinawa, why was I taking a walk so early in the morning. And my hosts were actually expecting me to have breakfast, and when I came back, they asked me, where have you been? Why did it take you so long? The temple's only 5 minutes walk. And I told them about the neighbour who'd stopped me and ended up showing me every single plant that was in her garden, ended up taking me to her home. She showed me her new home that was about to be renovated or what was going to be destroyed. We ended up having this really long, involved conversation. So she was really proud to talk about her own life, but equally wanted to know a lot about me. And so I guess it's that connection with new people and not just people in your life. And I thought that was a really great example of, no matter what age, people still want to learn and to find out what's going on in other people's lives. And so the host laughed, oh, she's really nosy, she knows everything about what's going on in this neighbourhood and who's coming and going.
I believe we all have one of those neighbours. However, through your research, what have you observed? What are the core elements or key elements you believe that are essential to create a blue zone?
So my business has drilled it down to 5 key ingredients around how to lead a meaningful, active and happy life. And those 5 ingredients are to live a life with purpose and be very engaged with community. And thirdly, vitality, so from a physical, mental and spiritual perspective. And then the 4th aspect is lifelong learning, so that sense of curiosity and always wanting to learn, build on your knowledge and learn new things as the world changes and evolves. Keep on top of all those changes and understand your role in those changes. And lastly, around wealth, and I think that's probably less of a problem for a lot of Australians who are moving into retirement. There is a lot of focus on the financial aspects of being ready for retirement. I think it's harder for a lot of people to understand what gives them that sense of meaning and drive for the purpose aspects, and how do you connect that with your community. That's probably harder for a lot of people to figure out.
Yeah, I love the aspect of lifelong learning, and I explored the way how universities of the future should work. And there was a great project from Stanford University around it's called the Loop University. So instead of have a block of university at the beginning of the working life and then working, it's more about go to the university, do the course, and only of a short time when you need it, let's say 6 to 12 months, but then periodically go to university when you need it. So like a loop, you always loop in when you need it in your lifetime. It's a great concept. And are there any particular wisdoms from, let's say, your trip into US? And you mentioned that they are, it's quite a disconnected from the ocean community, but what is unique about the US?
So I was quite curious to why Loma Linda in California was a blue zone, being a town in the US. It's a small town with about 24,000 people. And I read a lot about the town, and you know, I guess everything I read, it was a 7-day Adventist town, and so it's the plant-based diet, it's the day of rest, and people do really stick to it. So when I arrived on a Friday, no cafes or restaurants were open at all. People had already started to unwind on the Friday before their day of rest on the Saturday, and you know, everyone was having family dinners on the Friday night, and then Saturday was all about going to church, doing their community work in the afternoon, and also connection to nature. So it was very much baked into their weekly schedule to make time for others and to connect to nature and their family. So the really key important things was just part of their weekly schedule. So what really stood out for me is having that ritual of having time to de-stress. So even though it was an American town, that ability to switch off. So whilst they did still use devices, they were very aware of what they were using their devices for. So I went and checked out one of their largest churches. It had a congregation of 7,000 people, and I was really interested to see that they broadcast they have a program twice a day on the Saturday, and so they make it accessible to people who can't make it to church in person. So they use technology to their advantage, and the people in the congregation were also tweeting and using social media to share what their key takeaways were. So it wasn't necessarily this aversion from tech, it was this acceptance that technology is very much prevalent in their lives, but it was being conscious of what do they use their technology for. So when I chatted with a retired pastor and I asked him, so what does a day of rest mean to you? And he said, well, it's the nature of the work that you do. So in his case, he said, look, I still might log onto my iPad, but I just don't work on Saturday. So I'll still use it to communicate. We realise that people are so reliant on communication, but it's how we use our devices to connect and ignore any work-related emails that might come their way.
Now, thinking of our global audience, and there's quite a lot of startups out there, and many of them going through quite a challenging time, and tapping into your experience with as an entrepreneur in residence, can you utilize some of these takeaways from Blue Zones and translate them to helping startups maybe be conscious of their well-being as well?
Yeah, I think the most important takeaway from studying the Blue Zones and applying it to my own life as an entrepreneur has been the social aspect, the importance of being surrounded by a supportive network. And for me, it has been being co-located with people who are also entrepreneurs, who understand what the startup journey is like, how important it is to give emotional support to each other, and also advice and introductions to like-minded people who might care about the same market problem, social problem you're trying to solve. So that co-location is really important, to be amongst really supportive people. And equally, it's also making choices around who you choose to not have in your life. So that's equally as important, because if there are people who might be preying on your the things that you're lacking confidence in, that can actually be quite destructive. So it's not just about being surrounded by lots of positive people who highlight the amazing opportunity that's in front of you, but it's also about reducing the time spent with people who can drain your energy. So it's being very aware of who gives you energy and gives you the right sort of advice at the right time, and equally making sure that your energy isn't sucked by people who don't necessarily contribute to your entrepreneurial journey.
You mentioned earlier around diversity, and big companies are embracing diversity, but also how important it is to have diverse team members to actually see the point from different view.
Mm-hmm. And that's really hard to do, especially when you're a startup and you're looking for founders who are equally as committed and want to do the same, work on the same market problem as you and to create a wonderful solution. People naturally gravitate towards people who are very similar. And so I guess the key is to be aware of your own strengths and weaknesses and find someone who can work with who can balance you out. And it might be challenging to, it feels like, by having people who are very different from you, you end up having longer conversations because you have a different perspective. But in the longer run, if you have more people who come at, come at a problem differently and have a different perspective because they've got a different background and have different life experience, the longer term opportunity is going to be a lot greater because you thought about all the risks as well as the problem more globally, so that you can be more prepared for anything that might come up further down the track.
Wonderful. So be open, welcome other views and take them, embrace them, but be also be conscious of people who potentially suck your energy, so you don't want to be drained. And it sounds like a fine balance. So do you see companies that are successful embracing this type of attitude and welcome to diversity in smaller teams?
I think I've seen that the smaller organisations in Australia are better at embracing diversity. So when I talk about diversity, I don't just mean gender diversity, because that's often on the agenda of many diversity inclusion strategies in large corporates. That's number one, and I recognise that's very important. But the other aspect about diversity is intergenerational, and that's not something that's really talked about by that many organisations. But the smaller organisations, particularly professional services, that really recognise the value of their older staff members who've got a lot of the corporate knowledge, IP, and relationships with other staff members as well as clients. That's a highly valuable asset that more professional services organisations recognise and put a lot of effort into retaining. And so therefore they will think about what are the needs of their older staff members and giving them the flexibility to come and go, to work the hours that they'd like to work, give them the opportunity to go on sabbatical, come back, not necessarily in the same role, but it may be a different role where they can still leverage their knowledge and their interest in the industry, but then also recognising that that group also want to reskill, so giving them the learning opportunities to go into new jobs that maybe previously those jobs didn't exist in the past.
And to maybe spend more time, let's say, if you have 4 day per week working week and have 3 day weekend, how can you utilize this extra 1 day? Conscious that Stanford again introduced this N subject where you have to spend some time on your schedule in nature. That's why they call it N subject. And it'd be interesting maybe schools could adopt 1 day per week you have to spend outside. And it'd be interesting how it would shape up. But so in translating into Coffs Harbour, you spend a day here. We wish you spend here more and hopefully you come back.
Hopefully I'll come back.
And so do you see potential for Coffs Harbour to develop the mindset of the blue zone and maybe transition it into also embrace the blue economy?
Yeah, I think there's such great opportunity, and it might be the nature of the people I've met through Startup Ground, through you. I just get the sense that it's an amazing community that is socially oriented, very focused on the environment. So rather than trying to aspire to be a blue zone, I actually think that Coffs Harbour has the potential to create its own identity that's unique, that doesn't necessarily need to follow the key ingredients of the blue zones, because already you're doing it. You're already very socially connected. You're already involved in lots of amazing initiatives that I guess a lot of other parts of Australia would be quite envious of. And to add to the community aspect and the fact that you've got this fantastic culture where you're supportive of each other, people have a very healthy lifestyle. And so it seems like a lot of people have come from different parts of the world, different parts of Australia to live here. They've made life choices to bring their families here and re-establish their lives here. So there's already an awareness of how to integrate with a new community, how to build out relationships, how to lead a very healthy lifestyle. So you guys are leading the world in terms of how to live in a modern community. And what seems to be an opportunity is around the natural resources that you have here.
That's wonderful. And wow, do you guys feel better about that? Yes. I hope nobody's going to leave for tweed hats from this audience. And I would love to know about what opportunities you see in connecting to the startup space in Sydney, let's say, as you're coming from a very connected and very active startup ecosystem in Sydney. What can we offer to startups in Sydney to potentially utilize their funding and come here and do it from here?
I think the fact that there's so many people who've got lots of life and work experience here. There's probably a shortage of mentors with time in Sydney. There's a lot of them in Sydney, but they may not necessarily, they're not always connected to the accelerator space. So just from spending time here today, it seems like there'd be a great way to connect some of the startup community along with the modern elders. So people who've got life experience as well as a business experience and industry experience, and that sharing of knowledge with startups. So I guess by like even the innovation hub that I saw today with the startups there, I wonder if you could somehow bring in some of the mentors in other cities who want to have a taste of what the community life is like here in Coffs Harbour. Give them the opportunity to come here for many different reasons, whether it's mentoring and or having a taste of the community aspect that is missing in places like Sydney, Melbourne. And then I guess what we talk about when we have a lot of attendees coming to our programs who say they would like to make a sea change or tree change is we talk about getting them to try it first before they sell their family homes, downsize and completely move. So maybe it's an opportunity for them to come and try what it's like to live in Coffs before they make a complete move up here.
I like it. So we could become the minimal viable product for them to try how it is to have a sea change.
Absolutely. In our programs we talk a lot about experimentation.
Great.
So
love it.
having a 90-day plan, a roadmap, and trying different things, and taking key learnings from trying different things.
Well, who is on board as a partner? Hands up. Some of it. Yeah, here we go.
Right, absolutely. Give it a go.
Yeah, real estate agents. It's my first call. Excellent. Well, thank you, Natalie, and I hope you come back.
Thank you.
And
I'd like to come back.
I'd like to open the stage to questions, and so if anyone has a burning questions, please, here's the microphone.
Cheers. Thanks, Natalie. Stu Smith from Exercise Cognition. I really appreciate you coming up here to talk to us. I'm just wondering if you've got any observations from the blue zones that you visited, if there is a thriving innovation culture based around ageing in any of those centres. It seems to me that the opportunity is with an increasingly older society, that there are opportunities for startups to focus their attentions and efforts around innovation for services and technologies for older adults. And I just wonder whether or not you've seen that kind of startup culture in those blue zone communities.
Not in the blue zones, but Singapore has recently been labelled as a new blue zone. So I think there's been a lot of investment from government as well as large corporates who've been given tax incentives to focus on the cultural aspects of getting families to live close to older members of the family, as well as the technology and reskilling staff, so that there are work opportunities. So that's a really great example of one economy that's recognised there is an ageing population, but then they've been very proactive in serving its citizens and getting everyone involved, not just people in that segment, but younger members and people in the tech industry, to think about it more holistically.
Yeah, so I'd sort of argue that maybe Coffs Harbour could be an Australian example of how we could do that. We have not just great natural beauty and resources here, but also the natural affordances of higher than state average of older adults. And I know that we always talk about the fact that Coffs Harbour is bemoaning the fact that our young people are leaving the town, but at the same time we ignore the fact that we have a higher number of older adults, and they're people who are living healthy, well and independent into their 70s, 80s, 90s. It seems to me that they're an ideal test bed for some of these technology solutions.
Absolutely. I think you've got that innovation culture as well as the great lifestyle that makes it sustainable to be a startup founder, that makes it a lot easier because there isn't so much of that financial pressure just to afford going out for dinner and paying the mortgage in a big city. So definitely there's an environment that sets up startups extremely well to be able to solve a lot of the problems where you have access to people in the market who could trial and test, give feedback, co-design, collaboration with people who actually want to be part of that journey of creating solutions that meet their needs.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nick Johnson, Principal at Bishop Druitt College, one of the schools around the corner. Modern elders, love that term, I'll be using that, thank you. Modern elders, Australia is a transient population, we move around a lot, so therefore the blue zone link to community long term often doesn't occur in places like Coffs Harbour because a lot of people have been here for 5 to 10 years. 25 years ago, the town was only 25,000 people.
Right.
So it's a relatively new city compared to an old country town. And because of that, how can the modern elders that are here now, that might not be grandparents to local kids, how can we connect to schools? How can we leverage that skill and diversity of knowledge that they have with our youth?
The term modern elder actually came from Chip Conley, who's the mentor for Yan-Chatonsky, the co-founder of Airbnb, and has written a book about the modern elder. And his term for the modern elder is, mentorship is actually two-way. So it's not just imparting wisdom with younger people, but it's also about learning from younger people. So that's when those longer term relationships evolve, when there's mutual respect for what each person's really good at, where there's knowledge in both areas. So when Chip went and mentored Yan-Chatonsky at Airbnb, because Silicon Valley is a very youthful and often ageist place in the world, unfortunately. And when you walk around Airbnb, the campus is very youthful, and the founders are clearly very youthful as well. And so Chip Conley realised on his journey of mentoring the founders at Airbnb that he was also learning a lot about digital, and it was equally valuable to him by being a mentor because he got the opportunity to learn from younger people. So I think the opportunity with schools is fantastic because it's the people who've got a lot of life and work experience that are highly valuable to younger people in the community. And equally, there's so much to be learnt from younger people as well, but that respect is really important. I think that's probably what's missing in Australia, unfortunately, and does lend itself to ageism that happens in the community.
So obviously mentoring would be a positive outcome from that, from I guess the communication and connectiveness between the older and the younger generations, not just the knowledge exchange, and then effective outcome of increased respect between the generations?
I think that's really important, and I guess being raised by my parents who originally come from Hong Kong, Asian culture very much focuses on the respect for elders, and I've always been taught how important it is, like the way you talk to someone who's older than you, how you need to listen to people who know more than you. I've always been raised to, I guess, have those values, and that's not something that we see everywhere, unfortunately. And so I guess bringing back those values is probably really important, and it's something I need to keep reinforcing with my son, who's first year of high school, how important it is for him to listen to his grandparents and his parents as well.
Thank you.
Hi. Thank you, Natalie. It's been lovely listening to you and your research and so forth. I'm really interested, there was a term that you used, was it the silver economy?
Mm-hmm.
Can you elaborate a bit more on that?
Sure, and I have a love-hate relationship with that word, silver economy, because I think the word silver conjures up a beautiful colour, as you say, but I guess the demographic of people who are ageing don't necessarily like that term when we talk about that segment having silver hair. So I guess the silver economy is talking about a specific target market of people who are in that ageing demographic. So I think it's a really nice way to address it. People in that demographic have different needs, and therefore how we design solutions for them needs to be addressing their functional needs as well as emotional needs and how they see themselves. But interestingly, over the course of doing lots of customer interviews with people in that segment, they've often expressed that they don't like seeing images of people with silver hair holding hands walking down the beach. They don't necessarily relate to that. So I've been a bit turned off, and I sometimes wonder, is that the right terminology to use? I like it too as well. So, yeah.
Sorry, Adrian Smith, I'm Director of Midcoast Trucks. So we have soon to be 135 employees between our Coffs Harbour branch and Maxwell branch. So very, very proud of that. I forgot to introduce myself. I thought it was a really nice term, and I thought to me it triggered something that could be marketed to, with that transition, as you said, from full-time work into full-time, what did you call the term?
Full-time living.
Life, yeah.
Yes,
Life.
what we named our
company.
company.
I thought it was good, and it connotated that experience for me, silver.
Mm. Yeah, and also silver is valuable.
But that's what I thought.
Yeah.
So thank you.
So I personally...
For me, that's a great business idea. That's a nice marketing tool. And the second question, which is the most important to me, what was your findings with the type of food that people ate in the blue zones? I'm very, very interested in that.
It's a plant-based diet. So that, I've never been vegetarian, it never appealed to me. It wasn't until I saw the glowing skin and the clear eyes and the energy that people had that in Okinawa and Loma Linda, where I've seen how the plant-based diet seems to have an amazing impact on the health of people and how they look. So from a vanity perspective, that's what's inspired me to eat more plant-based food.
So was it a certain percentage, and was there any seafood or any kind of meat?
It varies between the 5 regions. So interestingly, in Okinawa, you kind of have images of Japanese eating a lot of seafood, and given that Okinawa is an island country, most of the food is actually stuff that's grown on land. So there's a little bit of pork, like if you have a whole platter, a whole meal, there might be a very small portion of pork where the fat has been boiled off. And so all the goodness and the protein's still there. But the seafood component's actually quite limited in Okinawa. It might be more prevalent in the other regions. Not so much in Loma Linda, and I guess once again it's very much plant-based. In Loma Linda, given that it's an American city, when you drive through, there's strip malls, there's a lot of fast food chains, including McDonald's, so that was very controversial when McDonald's came to town. But even McDonald's has a plant-based menu. So there's very specific items on their menu that cater for the Loma Linda market.
Thank you.
Can you touch on physical activity?
So Tony just asked me about the physical activity in the blue zones. It's very much linked to not having a specific, I must exercise more and fit in, a certain amount of time into my diary to include exercise. It's baked into everyday life. So living close to everything so that you can walk, as well as the connection with nature. So spending time gardening, going on hikes in the mountains, and just, I guess, having it as a part of everyday life.
Thanks, Natalie. That was very interesting. I was wondering if, when you were at MIRD, are there many silverpreneurs? That's another terminology there, Adrian. People who are of a certain age, who may have had former careers, either been an employee or who are starting new businesses. Are you seeing many people, and over 60 or over 55?
Not necessarily over 55, but I certainly saw some founders who have deep expertise in certain industries where it was really important that they had that knowledge of a certain market problem and were trying to do something new and innovative to solve those problems in a different way that maybe a corporate couldn't do. So that knowledge about a certain market problem is really valuable and important in becoming an entrepreneur.
Just as a follow-up, and my name's Julianne McEwen from 50 Plus Books. I met with Natalie earlier in the day and I said there does seem to be government programs around employment for people over 55, I think it is, and where there's certain subsidies, but I'm not sure whether there's any consideration given to people who are over a certain age commencing businesses. And it's not something that you're aware of or Tony's aware of?
I'm not aware of anything, and I think it would be an amazing opportunity. I'd love to see more of that, encouraging people who've got really deep expertise and networks in solving particular market and social problems, and adding on that level, that additional layer of how to be a founder of a new small business and hopefully turn that business into a scalable business. Those are skills I've had to learn over the last few years that I didn't necessarily have, even though I've got a product management background, which you would argue that would lend itself to being an entrepreneur. But when you've got limited resource, you have to do things very differently from how you might launch a new product when you're working in a corporate or a larger business that has more resources.
Thank you.
Natalie, just a quick question. In the blue zones, what were the people like? Or did they have a calmer, happier sense of well-being? Like what was all the things that they all were doing, but what were they actually like?
That was the thing that I really wanted to learn, because reading lots of books and blogs about blue zones, you kind of imagine, oh wow, this sounds like utopia. I wanted to go for myself to see with my very own eyes and connect with people to find out what were they like, and they definitely are very engaging people to talk to, love conversation, are really welcoming and have lots of energy, whether it comes from their plant-based diet or just curiosity and zest for life. I think it's a really great perspective that they had on the world outside of their own day-to-day lives. Like having a global view on other people, as well as looking beyond their communities, being very tightly integrated, but then also being very aware of the wider world around them and the changes around them. So I've been very inspired by the people I've met in those very different places. Okinawa and Loma Linda, culturally extremely different, but the commonality of the culture, and I think culture is everything. And I guess when you meet lots of people who are all very similar and have those positive attributes, you want to be part of it and you want to recreate that in other places that you go to.
I've got a question for you, Natalie. I'm interested to know, in the work that you've done here in Australia with professionals, you know, gearing up or on the cusp of retirement and looking ahead, were there any common themes at all related to health? Because I'm really aware of, I think, you know, Susan Ryan, our age discrimination officer, she put out a report a few years ago and she found that health was actually the biggest barrier that prevented people working for longer if they wanted to. Mm-hmm. And then it can also be, you know, poorer health can stop people enjoying their retirement when they finally get there. I'm just wondering, were there any consistent themes at all, you know, in your vitality section, or was it just pretty diverse?
I think health in general does impact the individuals as well as their partners and family members. So that's something that people might have been surprised by, that they've had having to take care of elderly parents or a partner is something that maybe people hadn't anticipated they needed to do. And then once again, coming back to workplace flexibility, that's a really important factor that more and more employers are having to consider, that the employee might be fit and healthy, but it's the people around them, the loved ones that they need to care for, where they need that flexibility. So I'm definitely seeing that health is an important factor, not just for yourself and, you know, caring for the carer, but also how does the health of others around them impact the individual.
Because I was also thinking about this afternoon when you're saying here we're pretty good at planning financially, or, you know, it's on our radar, but I was wondering, you know, did you see many people who were on the cusp of retirement and realising, oh my God, I've totally neglected my health, often because of the demands of corporate life? Were any of them confronted at all by that, or?
It's probably more the mental health side of things that's more of a problem.
Sure.
So that's probably more of a problem with white-collar workers in Australia, of the stress, and particularly those who've been in very linear career paths or are part of the corporate world, being very focused on their career and not so much on the other factors, like how do you make sure that you've got a lifestyle where you can de-stress on a regular basis, build up those connections with people who care for you and can support you through the tough times, having outlets to relieve the mental health issues.
Sure, thank you.
Hi Natalie. As a mother of two teenagers, I've noticing that our children are growing up in a very different world to what we grew up in, where they've got, you know, thousands of online friends, constant interaction, always on their computers, phones and all those sort of things. And I was just interested in the blue zones. Did you notice similar things with their children and grandchildren in that generation? Were the teenagers, I guess, as technology obsessed and social media obsessed as our kids, or have they managed to keep the practices of the elders down to the younger children?
I didn't really get down to that level of analysis. When I was in that church in Loma Linda, I did see a lot of younger people sitting in the audience on social media.
Right.
But they were listening to the content and they were tweeting, and, you know, I guess it was content that was relevant to them. But I certainly did see that device usage by that generation, and no one was stopping them.
Right.
So I was quite surprised to see that.
Yeah, because I think that's the concern. You know, you can take it. We do a lot of steps to try and encourage our kids to get outside, be active, but there's that pull for them, and I really worry at times what it's going to look like for them. Are they going to have the same opportunities to hit the sort of, you know, type of lifestyle we have? You know.
It'll be interesting to see whether those 5 blue zones will remain the 5 blue zones in future years, because as we all know, culture can change over time, and technology is changing everything at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Hi Natalie.
Hi.
Brian Abel's my name. How would we focus on incorporating multiculturalism in our blue zone and learning from the elders in different cultures? And how does that work compared to Okinawa and Loma Linda?
Actually, interestingly, with the 5 blue zones, they are quite monoculture. So I guess I'm very much a diversity advocate. I don't necessarily think that we need to model everything completely on the blue zones. I think a place like Coffs Harbour could adopt the things that you do like about the blue zones, but then add your own flavour to it. From what I understand, there are pockets in Coffs Harbour that where there is a bit of multiculturalism happening. Maybe less so than places like the big cities, where there's new migrants coming in. I'm second generation. Like I was born in Australia, but then I've very much been exposed to lots of different cultures through travel, working with people from different countries, by working with multinational corporations, and I guess curiosity to travel and learn from other cultures. I think having an open mind and recognising that different cultures bring different things, and being able to work with people from different backgrounds, and that appreciation for differences is really the key to building that multicultural society.
Thank you, Natalie, very much. The discussion has stimulated another kind of question, and I'm wondering if there was any kind of experience that you ran across where communities, though relatively monocultural, and perhaps in that respect sharing a lot of values around family connection and intergenerational parenting, if you will, whether there was also a way in which people who have no grandchildren, for example, as they get into their elder years, as I don't, might have a different kind of experience? Or is there a way in which the blue zones actually also help the quality of life of people who aren't connected in that sort of intergenerational way?
One of the things that we briefly touched on in Okinawa, there's a concept of moai, and this means a group of 5 to 10 people from a very young age will be brought together and connect with each other, and they meet on a regular basis to provide social, emotional, and even financial support to each other. So I guess it's very much baked into Okinawa culture to have these extended networks of small groups of people where they are like family but not family. So I guess that's one example of groups coming together and supporting each other as people progress through different stages of life. I think that's probably what comes to mind right now in terms of how do communities come together and support each other.
Right, thank you.
So another example is to let us know to be part of our next Be Connected event, where we have youngsters teaching mature people how to use mobile phones, and the mature people teaching the kids how to communicate to the mature people. And so you bring the two generations together with technology, and we have proven last Tuesday that it works, and both groups have fun with it. And so it would be great to have you there next time.
So my opportunity to learn Snapchat.
Yeah. So thank you very much, everyone. I did want to stress out that one blue zone embraces red wine as well, or two.
A few of them too.
A certain type of red wine. So I encourage you to try the red wine tonight, and I hope to see you next time. In end of November, we have a amazing local speaker this time, Mike Smith. And he recently raised quite a lot of funds through his crowdfunding campaign on Kickstarter. His company is called Zero.co. So it will be great to have you there and supporting our upcoming startup and success story. So I hope you stay here for a bit more networking, and looking forward to see you next month.
Thank you.